Hey everyone, welcome back to Beyond the Feature. This is the show where we focus less on what the tools can do and more on the workflows, operating models, decision making that actually make tools worth using. And as usual, I'm Dr. Patrick Jones. So this week we have a spotlight conversation, and I'm happy to be joined by Jim Spignardo, who's the Director of Cloud Strategy and AI Enablement for ProArch. So Jim works with enterprise organizations that have invested heavily in 365 and Azure, but like a lot of organizations out there, they don't always see the measurable outcomes they expected. The tools might be deployed, AI might be turned on, but the adoption feels totally uneven. Admin teams feel overwhelmed, and the return on investment is more assumed than actually measured. What I like about Jim's approach is that he starts in a different place, right? He focuses on the operating model, clarifying ownership, redesigning workflows, and setting that governance guardrails that help enable instead of block. And then aligning the technology to those processes so the results can actually be tracked and sustained, right? Imagine that. So in this conversation, we're going to stay true to Beyond the Feature theme. We're not here for a feature tour, buttons to click, stuff like that. We're here for the real world workflows. What breaks, what fixes it, and how organizations, small, medium businesses, nonprofits, et cetera, can move from we bought the licenses to we're actually seeing measurable performance improvements. So Jim, welcome to the show. For people meeting you the first time, you are the Director of Cloud Strategy and AI Enablement. And if you're like me, right, because I've got a similar title, people ask me, what does that mean? And I sit there and I go, I don't know, right? So what does it actually mean to you?
To me, it's really just about having conversations with our customers around modernizing and maturing their IT infrastructure in support of the business. It's probably the simplest way I can explain it. And it's really about how do we take what were the old paradigms of how business functioned and applying the new models and really trying to maintain a competitive edge in a very competitive world.
Nice. So when you explain that, do people even get it? Or do they gloss over?
It depends. It depends. We have certain clients that, when we do IT strategy sessions with them or talk about the concept of maturity modeling, are very aware of those concepts based on the nature of their business. And there's others that go, what does that mean? Can we? And so we sit down with them and we talk. We talk about, where their environment stands today, what other technologies they can be leveraging to best create the most efficiency within an organization, keep them as secure as possible, and also unlock the full potential of their employees. So, and AI is a big part of that.
Yeah. And that's the end of your title, right? AI enablement. So What are you enabling? What people, processes, governance, tooling? What's the target?
It's really all of it, right? You can't really tease them apart. You can't separate one from the other. If you really want to create the best possible outcomes, you have to focus on the people and training them and getting them familiar with what this technology is capable of. Giving them a sense of confidence and trust in these tools is very important. And also supporting them in their journey of exploration. As it relates to process, one thing that organizations really need to take a really hard look at is what's working today and what's not. And don't just try and push everything forward and put AI on top of it. It's really about, you can no longer hide from broken process. You need to think about, how do we create a system that actually functions appropriately so that we then can apply artificial intelligence to that. And that's really all around the governance. The tooling is really the last thing that could be considered. Once you've kind of worked through all of those big, ugly types of challenges, then you can think about, okay, which tooling would we want to use? And, for us, that's primarily been the Microsoft 365 Copilot platform.
Yep. And that's the heart of this podcast right here. You said it exactly right. The last thing, the tooling, isn't really the most important. It's getting everything else ready and set up So when it doesn't even matter the tool, like you said, Copilot's what you use, but there's others out there that other people use. It's an agnostic process. So I love
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
But then, hey, Copilot is embedded within 365, makes sense to use it. So here's the tools at that point, right? And now
Yep.
you can take advantage of it the right way. Awesome. So what's the kind of organization that you step into when you help them with this industry? What's your typical place that you're working with when they call you?
It's pretty diverse. We do have expertise in certain verticals. The request for assistance and support typically is coming from organizations of all types: professional services, manufacturing, nonprofits, life science. They're typically calling us, though, after some executive team or board of directors has asked for a plan for AI. And usually they can hear the panic in their voice and they have no idea where to start. They're getting a lot of pressure. And what are we doing around AI? I was talking to my other buddy at the company X, and they're saying that they're already making agents, and they've transformed their business and are saving 50% of the cost they were last year.
Yeah, and that's crazy. And setting up those processes is where it starts. I've seen a couple of those recently myself. And honestly, for me, it's the SharePoint governance because
Mhm.
that's what
Yeah,
Copilot's pulling on. So a
yeah.
lot of the things I'm getting is, hey, can we do like a forecast of what we have, where it's at?
Hmm.
Uh, and that's the idea. I keep telling them that's where you start
Yeah.
because, like you said, the tools, it does you no good if it's pulling on data that's 10 years old that you still have access to. So let's scan it. Yeah, totally get that. Awesome. So recently, are there any AI trends that these guys are coming to you with more of? You said agents, you said
Yeah.
tools and stuff like that. What are you seeing like trending recently? And when I
Yeah.
say recently, hey, it goes by week, right? It's not by month anymore.
It does. There's definitely been a incredible uptick in probably the last 6 months with organizations finally accepting the usage of these tools and beginning to understand what they're capable of. So it's all really been centered around if an organization has been using AI effectively, and I will emphasize the word effectively, for more than 6 months, they are most likely ready now to begin developing and exploring agents. And so that's what we're hearing more and more. Sometimes we have to back those companies up, right? They want to jump right to agents. And we, again, have to go back to the maturity and the governance and say, slow your roll, right? You probably could develop an agent, that may be something that's, frontline worker facing, where you have field workers where they're just going to use a chatbot or something like that. But if you're really talking about fundamental change across an organization, you need to make sure that you have a good, solid enablement plan or roadmap in place.
Nice. Yeah, and that's exactly right. Right. Agents is huge right now, and it's changing daily.
Yeah,
So that's the hardest part to keep ahead of. Um,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
so, what are some of those warning signs when they come to you and they're like, "Oh yeah, we've got
Yeah,
these tools, but we're not really using them. How do we use them better?"
yeah.
Um,
Uh, I would say just the way they position that language. If they continue to discuss this in the context of tools that they've invested in versus the strategy of how to actually operationalize AI, that's a huge red flag because they have the conversation completely backwards. And so we kind of say to them, "That's awesome. Park that off to the side. You love ChatGPT, you love Claude, you love Copilot, whatever. Great. You have some people in the organization who have taken the initiative and are starting to get things done, or starting to see some incredible results from these tools. But let's pause there and talk about what is your vision for the future. What do you want to see the organization become, and what are the big challenges in front of you that potentially AI could assist with?"
do they come at you with any kind of metrics or KPIs that they're trying to implement? But you're like, dial it back, or
Yeah,
they're
and I laugh a little bit there, but
yeah,
very few, but some. Typically,
really,
when an organization is in the manufacturing space, or they're in an industry that's KPI heavy, that's really, metrics can make the difference between a profitable year and a non-profitable year where margins are, razor thin. Those types of organizations usually are very metric driven and do have some concept of what they're looking for as it relates to moving the needle. If it's developing an agent or implementing AI somewhere, most organizations, you have to even actually explain. And again, I'm not trying to be dismissive here, but explain what a KPI is, and then say, okay, if you haven't already looked at what your baseline metrics are for a particular work process, stop, take some time to evaluate, what the cost, effort, time, or whatever it is that process takes, so that you can establish that baseline and then build your use case to try and move the needle in whatever direction you're hoping to move it, and compare it against that baseline. And sometimes, you look at the companies looking like, yeah, we don't have a baseline. We know it takes too long. Okay, we'll figure out what that means. Right? And then we can know whether or not we're actually being effective with these tools, because they're not inexpensive. And you want to make sure that investment is paying off for you.
Have you seen any metrics that are like the go-to, like, hey, this is actually one you want to pay attention to? Because some people say, hey, and even Microsoft promotes, hey, this is how many you have rolled out in your organization. But just because they have it, hey, that's the features, right? What are the metrics that will tell you whether this is actually making progress? Is there something that you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think things like cycle time, how long things take to complete, the just decreasing work volume for individuals, and just things like success rates when it relates to sales, right? Looking at the how many wins do we have versus how many did we have before, because we're either having better turnover or better close rates, right? Faster pre-sales times, and better quality. The C-suite and the board is always looking at revenue metrics. Those are the big ones they always want to look at. So if you can find a use case that can tie to that usually goes a long way in trying to keep the initiative alive and really help drive further adoption and enablements.
Nice. Now we can talk AI for hours, but let's pull it back a little bit and get a little bit bigger, because you do more than just AI. It's total, workforce and strategy when it comes to digital. So the way when these people call you, right? What's the time you walked into just a rough situation? Somebody called you, said, we need help. What did you walk into, and how did you turn it around? Like, what was the turning point?
We're a managed service provider as well, and we were born out of a small upstate company, which is near upstate New York company, which is where I'm based. And one thing that we recently had was a customer who was kind of languishing. Let's put it this way. They hadn't invested in their infrastructure in quite some time. And internally, there was a willingness to kind of throw our hands up and give up on this company. We are moving to a more modernized model of delivery for our managed service practice. And like I said, they weren't investing, they weren't maturing. And I really just turned to the account team and said, give me a shot. Let me go meet with the owners of that organization and the office manager in person and have a candid conversation about why putting money back into the business was a worthwhile activity, and that actually they could potentially save money in the long run. So, he sat down with them, explained in very clear language, something, that they could understand, non-technical way. And they were really a turnaround success story, and our fully modernized customer that have reduced their support costs to us by almost 50%, while at the same time simplifying their environment and having much more control and visibility into what's going on in their environment.
Yeah, this day and age, it's a different landscape anymore. It's a keep it simple, stupid kind of a landscape.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? You don't have to over-engineer it. You need internet, and you need the tools, and you need the processes that make those tools really work for you. And it can be that simple. And people just over-engineer it or don't want to change. And that's been the hardest part.
Yep.
And change is the big thing. So when you get in there, what's an example of that workflow change, just like what you were talking about, like specifically before and after steps that the people watching will actually recognize, and they can go, wow, yeah,
I think a lot of times it's just having clarity in helping to move the needle. Understanding what's at stake if organizations stay on their current path and don't reinvest in their business and don't adopt some of these transformational technologies. I liken it to, I'm probably a few years out from putting my house on the market. I'm in my early 50s now, but not making any repairs on your house over decades, right? And then trying to sell it at market or above market value, and I'm not understanding why no one wants to buy your home, right? It's because you didn't spend all those years keeping it up and maintaining it, and it's very similar to a business. And businesses have cycles. At some point, someone is most likely, in the case of the one I just discussed, they're going to want to sell that business to another organization, and handing something over that's already in a really great position, that's a simple asset to attain, is a much better position to be in than saying, well, we really didn't spend any money on this business for years, and I know we have a good practice here, but what do you think, right? And so all those things that tend to resonate. You got to start speaking at the level of that business owner.
I love that analogy. That's a great. I'm going to steal that one, by the way. That's a great one, because it helps to let people understand the importance of that, right? And you're probably working with the champions of the organization. The people that really, you don't have to try to have them buy in. It's they have to help the people that make decisions buy in.
Yep.
So what is, and I call them champions. I know a lot of people out there do. So what's that best champion model working with them? What makes it work when you work with those guys, and make it sustainable?
Yeah. And then we're doing this a lot lately. And in that term, again, depending on how tapped in our organizations are, they might get that term. But a lot of times you have to define what that term means, first of all. And then when it comes to Copilot and AI adoption, we're very strongly trying to impart upon these organizations they should have champions. To me, what a champion is really a true believer in that technology, or that will stop at nothing to see AI take hold in that business. And they're the ones that are in every meeting and they just won't shut up. And just keep bringing up, we could use AI for that. I was that person probably 20 years ago with SharePoint. I remember this at my company. Someone would say, we need a process that can handle this. And I go, SharePoint could do that. And they would just kind of go, oh God, here he goes again.
Here he goes again.
Yeah. But more importantly, you have to have either someone who's partially or completely dedicated to that kind of role. Right? It can't be a hobby. We need to be able to tie performance metrics to someone who is designated as a champion. Right? It can't be like, well, I'm going to do this for a little while and then I'll, it's not like signing up for the birthday committee at work, right? I'm on that committee and I left it, and then someone else is coming. It's really a role that should persist through many business cycles.
Yeah, and I don't know if you notice it. Some of the characteristics of those champions, usually I see like two different groups. One is the people that love features, right? Hey, it's a shiny feature. I want to try this. I want to do this. I want to do this because it's the feature. But then you get the others that are like, I see that there's a problem in the process, and I know that there's tools. Might not know what tools, but I know there's tools that can help me. And both of them are champions in a sense.
Yeah.
But man, those process people, you just gravitate to them because they don't care what you use. They just want to fix something.
Yeah.
They see a problem, they want to fix it.
Yeah. If you can team people together that are like that, right? Someone who's more of the wonky person who loves just knowing all the capabilities and features, and then the other person who's all about process improvement and procedures. You can team those two together. You've got a winning solution there.
Yeah, and see that's like a constructivist philosophy, right? You got to have that knowledgeable other. That's how the people grow. Is when you can turn around, you learn more from each other than you do. I see this all the time. I'll do a training session, and there's percentages there. If I do a training session, only 10% of what I teach they'll actually remember or implement.
Yes.
It's when they turn to their teammate and actually start working together and implementing it.
Yep.
That's like 70% of the problem right there. Yet you're going to solve everything that way. And
Yeah,
then,
I agree.
20% of it is kind of them on their own, just kind of searching it. But
Yep.
then them together, like you're saying, is gold. So a lot of times that's me in some of these relationships because, they might not have somebody like that. But if you have a company that has two of those guys and you pair them up, that's the sustainability you're looking for. Love it. Uh, so with the AI, what do you think out there is like hype compared to real?
Good question. I think at an individual level, people who are motivated are really crushing productivity gains. Right? They're not waiting for permission. They're not waiting for someone to show them how to use things. But at an organizational level, most are still trying to figure out their broader strategy. And so I think the hype is that you're going to just be able to press a couple buttons, and voila, your entire organization is transformed. I'm writing an ebook that I'm hoping to get out before the end of the month that kind of goes into this. It looks at, and the title of it is called The AI Turning Point. And it's less about features and more about what businesses need to do to position themselves appropriately for this transformational change that's inherently going to happen one way or the other, and how they need to address the skeletons in the closet and fix the things that are broken. But it also kind of takes a position of a fictitious company with certain individuals with certain personalities and job roles, and how, as these decisions are made, how does that impact them specifically, and how to kind of navigate the politics of that as well. So,
I love that. The personas, when people read those type of things, they gravitate to that and it
yeah.
speaks to them. I love it. Hey, I'll have to, if it'll be on Amazon, right? I'll pick it up.
Probably not on Amazon. It'll be free. I'm going to probably just put a link to it in LinkedIn and let people download it. So maybe the next one we'll get some publishing behind it, but this one is really just for the fans, essentially.
There you go. Love it. That's how you get people in, right?
Yep.
So cool. So again, with AI, is there any advice that you might have? We've talked about a lot of it, but if somebody wants to introduce it in their organization without overwhelming the organization, because if you go too fast, the bosses will be like, pull it back even further.
Yeah. Yeah.
What would be some advice you'd have on how to get started with it?
Yeah. My big takeaway there is start small, build those high impact, low effort use cases. More importantly, share the successes that you've achieved. And then really it's rinse and repeat. That was the model that we followed in our adoption journey. And to kind of put some numbers behind that, we started 2 years ago with 10 licensed users of Copilot. And that's kind of when I was blessed with the role I'm in and told, make this scale, right? We're behind you, but you got to prove it out. And so, through a lot of effort, a lot of training and guidance and assistance on use case development, today we have 150 licensed users, which is about 30% of the organization. And we can demonstrate about $75,000 a month in assisted value to the organization, which easily pays for itself. We're now approaching close to $1 million a year in assisted value by the use of Copilots.
Nice. It's amazing how just 365 environment over the past 10 years has just exploded for organizations, that as they, see it, and AI is just, and with Copilot, the next step on that. But how that whole ecosystem just can impact an organization if they're implementing it all. It's amazing. I got started with a school district, and we were a Microsoft, showcase school district doing 365. Crazy, no servers at all. This was like 10, 15 years ago, one of the first ones out there. And just seeing where it is now and what we had back then, it really hasn't changed a whole lot if you jumped into it at that point. But there's so many more resources now that they have that they're trying to solve everybody's problem, which is amazing, but overwhelming, right?
Yeah, sure,
So
absolutely.
That's
Yeah,
what I love about your advice right there, right? Try not to overwhelm them. Get started with that strategy first. Think about it, how it's going to impact out there, and then earn that value as you go and expand.
yeah,
That's great
yeah,
advice.
absolutely. Yeah, and we love to find those, what I would say, there are unexpected success stories, especially in industries which typically seem very traditional, because you get a lot of comments from customers. Oh, you don't understand education, or you don't understand the power industry, or you don't understand nonprofit. We could never do that. That's just, it would take too much time, too much effort. And then you turn around and go, can I bring someone in the room, or can I show you a case study of an organization just like yourself, who pretty much turned that entire narrative on its head, and have proven that that's not the case, and that just because you have an assumption about what an industry is how an industry is supposed to operate, doesn't mean that's how it has to operate.
Yeah. And then you get the opposite end also, which is just as difficult, where they're like, hey, I'm in, food service and I want to do all of this. And
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah,
yeah, can you do it? Yes. Can I do it now? No, because you have to build that
yeah,
foundation first,
yeah,
but they've
yeah,
got the beautiful vision of where they want to be, and
yeah.
you got to dial them back. And sometimes that's just as hard, if not harder, than building somebody up from
Sure.
behind.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely.
Yeah.
They both have their levels of challenges, but I'll tell you, I would rather work with the person who's constantly pushing the envelope than the person you're trying to drag along, right?
Oh, I
Um,
learned so much from those guys because
yeah,
they're asking me questions that can
right.
it do it? Maybe. Let
Yes,
me let me let me try.
yes, exactly.
And
Right.
let's
They're
see.
pushing you outside of your
Yes,
capability. Yeah, and they're kind of
I
challenging
love it.
you to show them, yeah, that, or tell me why it can't be done, right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
it's usually not why it can't. It's, hey, let's make this work.
yeah, right.
And yeah,
And
there's some ways. There's some bad practice ways to do it, which I try to avoid people to do, like especially in SharePoint, right? Yes, you can break inheritance, and yes, you can do this, and yes, you can do that. But do you want to manage that your whole life?
right.
Because that's what you're going to end up doing.
We're gonna leave that to have to untangle
Yeah.
in the future.
I
Yeah.
just saw one of those yesterday. A colleague pointed one out, and they had every page had a different permission group, not
Okay.
even groups, individual users to
Oh,
access pages in SharePoint. And I was like, wow, who created this?
yeah.
Because that's its own job in management.
Yep.
He's in the process of trying to create like groups, who
Mhm.
needs access, and investigate the organization. Because just because you can do it doesn't mean you should.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Just because that ability exists doesn't mean you should necessarily do it that way.
And
Yeah,
there might be a
our
use case
SharePoint
for it.
admin runs into those types of systems
Oh,
all the time.
yeah.
Keep us in business.
That's it. And you can't say no, that's wrong, because everybody has a use case. And that's
Yeah.
why I always tell them there's a
Yeah.
best practice, but there's also reasons for breaking that practice.
Yeah.
But the trick is make sure your reason is justified and
Yep.
that you can sustain it. Right.
Yeah.
And if
My book gets into that, right? Just
I,
because it works doesn't mean that that's the best way to do it, or you're not forcing your people to work harder than they need to, right? And that's really what it comes down to is, well, it works. We're succeeding, right? But at what cost? And could you do better if you didn't have all of these legacy uh, entanglements, right? Technology entanglements.
well, the idea is to make the job easier. That's what this is all about. If you can take that load off and make the job easier, potentially you can either do more or do it better.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the
And,
idea.
yeah, and having been a manager, I understand too that people want to know that you're spending effort at trying to make their lives easier, right? Not harder, right? A lot of times it always seems like there's another requirement or another goal that we are piled upon us, instead of saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to make your life easier. And that really is a great recruiting a message, but it's also a great way to retain talent as well.
Yeah, that change process. I mean, that you really have to be a master of change process when it comes to working on this, and the stages for that, because that's really what it comes down to. People are more willing. And just try to find your barriers and work through those together.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. So let's jump into forecasting, because being a director of digital strategy, right? You like to look ahead 4 steps because somebody's probably 5 steps and you got to anticipate. So looking ahead, what do you see some upcoming needs for modern organizations out there? And how are you steering those strategy conversations?
One of the things that we're doing is we're adding. We usually do maturity modeling for all of our customers during our strategy sessions to show them where they stand, giving them an actual score. So in the last 2 years, we've actually added two new technology stacks to that. One is data, and the other one is AI. And so we're kind of measuring them against those. But what I would say is, as we talk to them, one thing we try to impart is that you need to think about dedicated roles to AI and governance going forward. And when I say dedicated, it doesn't need to be completely dedicated, but partially dedicated. Someone needs to own these things, just like someone owns HR and someone owns finance. Data, AI, and governance are things you cannot live without as we move forward in this more newer modern world.
Yeah. And security wise too, because if somebody doesn't own it,
Yes.
nobody owns
Yeah.
it.
And
It
that's,
just takes its own
yeah,
life.
I think that message has landed and is I think there was in the last 5 years that's become more relevant, more apparent to organizations that they need a security program in place, whether it's something they manage or someone else manages for them. But the governance stuff and the AI is still kind of like, well, Terry in finance is going to do this, 1 day a week, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. They use a computer, so they know what we're talking about.
Right, exactly. They showed me a video they created through with Sora, and it was really cool.
Yeah. Hey, so there are technology contact for you.
Exactly.
So, what should a leader stop doing immediately if they want those measurable outcomes, not just in AI, but in their entire Microsoft stack ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. And we spent a lot of time trying to really make sure that companies make the most of those investments. We understand it's not cheap, but what kills us is when we see an organization that has all these capabilities that they've licensed and they're not using them. But one thing I would say to those folks is you got to stop blaming the tools and fix your business. Right? It's not the tools' fault. We run into this ourselves. We have a ticketing system. Will remain unnamed, where everybody likes to beat up on it. And one thing I constantly remind them of is it can do a lot of different things. We're just not feeding it good information as much as we could. And so, yes, could we go out and buy another one that's does the three things that we think are really important? But let's try to get the most use out of what we already have. The other thing I would say is understand what you're paying for and how to leverage the investment to the maximum amount of capabilities. Again, go back to looking at all the things that are included in the M365 SKUs and how much of that the client is actually using and utilizing, and how much of it they're just leaving on the table. And they exist for a reason. When our goal there is to try and push that as much as we can to say, if you really took full advantage of this, you'd be amazed at, and you'd probably not look at that every year when you have to renew as, oh, good Lord, they're going to raise prices again, or, why do we have to pay all this money, blah, 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 right?
Yeah, no, and you touched on it, the licensing, and so I love it because I have these conversations all the time with people that are like, well, we're on business basic. Should we go to standard? Or we're on standard. Should we go to premium? Or we're E3. Should we go to E5? And it's like, what are you looking to do? What are you looking to, is it going to save you something? Do you want to do more security? Do you want to do phones? Do you want to do these things? If that's a potential, then yes. If it's current, let's do it. If it's potential, maybe not, but that's when you have to do that breakdown. Like you said, here's all the stuff that comes with it. Is any of this worth your while? And then what about this one? Is any of this worth your while? To find out that sweet spot for them.
Yeah,
because I don't think they realize all the security stuff that goes into an E5.
What really kind of I struggle with is when you see a client who had the capabilities within their current Microsoft licensing and they're already paying for it and then went out and bought a third-party product that does exactly the same thing. You're like, Intune is probably a good example. Defender for Endpoint is another example. And they go, well, so and so had experience from his last job, and he came in here, and the rep really sold us on it. I'm like, but you're paying for something that already does that. Why would you pay someone else to do that also? Right? You're double paying for these things.
Yeah. And we look at it like what features are in there. Because, I mean, it's like 80-20, right? Microsoft can do 80%
Yeah.
of what you want, but there's 20% that maybe it's a special use case. Okay. So you need that third party if you want to do this, because Microsoft lives in the majority.
Mm-hmm.
So we like to try to find those out. But like you said, you don't want to have these extra like email filtering features and stuff.
Right.
You don't
Yeah,
need
that's a
that.
good example
Well,
too.
then
Yeah.
you don't need that. You can just use the email filtering built in, and you save yourself that investment, and it's one pane of glass.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just trying to get people to, you know, verbalize
Yeah.
what they're using, what they're not, because sometimes they don't even know. Somebody's, like you said, somebody set it up
100%. Yeah.
and walked away, and we're just going with what it's using. Well, what do you use of it, right?
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah, absolutely.
that's always so fun, right?
For
All right,
sure.
well, we're getting up close on time. So, where can people follow your work? And I know that there's types of problems you solve specifically.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to let people know where they can find you and what kind of things you can help them with?
Sure. So, best place to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm the only Jim Spignardo on there. And every other Spignardo that's on there is a relative of mine. So we're a small clan. I write 3 articles a week on business and IT and AI and Copilot. So, I'd encourage you to follow or subscribe to my newsletter, which is called Control Alt Innovate. As far as my organization, ProArc, we are a tier 1 CSP for Microsoft. We have at least 7 different specializations, one of those being Copilot. And our main focus is data, AI, and security. And so, there's a lot that we can offer an organization who's interested in partnering with us.
So, and that isn't enough, right? Because as big as what you're talking about, you could have more.
Yeah, sure.
So awesome. Well, thank you for coming on with us today. And I know this is going to be valuable for a lot of our listeners out there. So if you guys think this is valuable, make sure you follow us, follow Jim out there. Make sure you like us, subscribe to us, and just help other people by sharing us with them if you think this is valuable. So, all right. Well, thank you, Jim, and I'll talk to you later.